say good afternoon to everyone here, the panelists, everyone who's over here, and welcome to the Explore the World of Software Engineering panel. My name is Glenn, and I'm currently a student at Skyline College. And currently, my course is computer science, which makes sense since everyone who's watching here is usually related to that field. And my co-moderator for today is Crystal. Would you like to introduce yourself, Crystal?
Hi, I'm Crystal Hernandez. I go to Santa Ana College. My major is mechanical engineering, and thank you for joining us today. We're super excited to get started.
Likewise, thank you. So could you go to the next slide, Amber? Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so for today, this is what we're showing you. This is the agenda for today. So we're gonna start off with welcoming and introducing our panelists. And then next up, we're gonna do panel questions and some Q&A, and then we're gonna go ahead and close the event. All right. So for today, I'll go ahead and introduce Mr. Chirag Medora and Mr. Thomas Bruchetta, and then Crystal will go ahead and introduce Mr. Joe Spears and Ms. Morgan Stelly. So I'll go, Steffi, and then I'm going to go ahead and start with Mr. Chirag Medora. So Mr. Chirag is an engineer manager at Quizlet, leading teams that grow subscription revenue and build the infrastructure around it. Before Quizlet, Chirag has developed software for a range of industries, jobs, gaming, healthcare, and telecom. Chirag grew up in Mumbai, India, and currently resides in San Francisco with his wife, daughter, and an unknown number of his daughter's imaginary pets. Wow, that's a full house. Oh, man. All right. So we're going to go ahead and go with Mr. Thomas Bruchetta, who is a lead front-end developer at Medical Solutions. He focuses on storytelling and a humanistic approach to creating web content. He has 7 years experience developing digital experiences for all types of clients, including Nike, Twitter, Facebook, and Snapchat. He has a true passion for collaborating with interdisciplinary teams, presenting to clients, and creating innovative products that promote social justice. Thomas has also taught web development as an adjunct instructor at Portland State University. Thomas is passionate about snowboarding, hiking, disc, golf, and finding new ways to make his 4-month-old daughter laugh. All right, and I'll go ahead and give you the mic, Crystal.
Thank you. So now to introduce Joe Spears. Joe Spears has a diverse role within the National Ignition Facility SHOT Data System team, where he works primarily on a portfolio of Java-based applications. In addition to his software development duties, he oversees software architecture for applications that define the configuration of experiments for the world's most energetic laser. Prior to NIF, he was a senior software architect for Visa, where he contributed to the real-time messaging, loyalty, and fraud detection products. Joe also has had extensive experience in startups, having served a variety of roles, including founding his own company in 2008, which was later acquired. And Morgan Steffi is an iOS engineer currently at Quizlet and has been building apps since 2014. What first drew her to engineering was the fact that she could create anything without needing to pay for building materials to clean up any physical messes. Little did she know that she would have many code messes to clean up. She started her career by launching a startup while in college and learned a lot of things the hard way, but eventually landed at Quizlet, where she's passionate about making effective studying tools that are accessible to everyone. So we're going to start off now with our background questions. And how this is going to go is I'm going to read these questions, and then each panelist is going to go through both questions at a time. And we're going to have like 30 minutes to do so with the questions. So our background questions, our first one is, what was your major in college and what schools did you attend? Then how and or when did you start exploring the field you're in? I would like to start with Joe, if that's okay.
Sure. So I actually started college late. I didn't know what I wanted to grow up to be when I was in high school, and I wound up joining the Army and really did a lot of searching in the Army for what I wanted to do, and discovered some of the technology that we could use to do cool and interesting things while I was there. And so when I got out of the Army, I went to Indiana University, started as a business major, and then found that I didn't really like counting other people's money. And so I switched over to computer science and earned my bachelor's in science and computer science at Indiana University, and then went to University of San Francisco, where I got my master's in computer science. And I really started exploring computer science before I even knew I wanted to do that job, when I was in the Army and learning about some of the new and interesting things that technology could do. I always thought that computer science was more about writing accounting programs or games. I really didn't have a view that I could do much more than those two things. And as I got out in the world, my eyes were kind of opened quite a bit.
Cool, fantastic. How was that? Are you San Fran local?
I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. I work at Lawrence Livermore Lab, which is about 30 miles southeast of San Francisco.
All right, that's okay. So then I'd like to move on to our next panelist. Can we do Thomas, please? If you can unmute yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. Hello, everyone. Thomas Bricketta again. I use he, him pronouns. And I went to college at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And when I got there, I, like a lot of folks, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I just thought I wanted to be really rich. So my original major was business, because I thought people in business make lots of money. But I didn't really enjoy it very much. So I quickly switched to electrical engineering just because I thought it would be challenging. And I liked building stuff. I liked fixing problems. And so I studied electrical engineering, got my bachelor's in that. But by the time I graduated from college, I was really much more interested in doing direct service, helping people with everyday problems. So I went on actually to get a master's degree in social work and worked in community mental health for about 3-4 years. And so in terms of like starting to explore the field, I never really thought about software development, web development, but I realized my interest in solving problems combined with my desire to help people in need could really be combined in some interesting ways, specifically with web development, as there's a lot of problems that require like networking of people and resources, and the web is really well equipped to do that. So it was really, I think, 7 years after I got out of college that I started getting involved in web development. And the how for that is I did an apprenticeship with a web developer at the time who sort of took me on in almost like a trade school, where I worked with this gentleman for a year, making very little money and with no health benefits. But I completely, in that way, was sort of taught through the apprenticeship as well as self-taught. I don't have a degree in computer science, though I will say my degree in engineering really helped with a lot of the mathematics involved in software development and thinking about algorithms and logic. But no, I don't have like formal training in computer science.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really like cool that we have like very similar courses for most engineering majors. Okay, so now I would like to move on to Morgan. If you could answer the set, please.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Morgan Steffi, and I went to the University of Memphis and studied computer science. And I started exploring the field that I was in, I would say, probably as like a 6-year-old. I was doing figuring out how to change the start button in Microsoft XP to say a different word. I was like always like a tinkerer on computers. And then in high school, I updated my high school's website. That was just like a fun opportunity. My high school had to be on the computer club. So I did that and then realized I had a lot of fun and made like more money than my retail job making websites for local businesses. So I think it always was just something that interested me, and then I could get paid for it too. So it was a good match.
For sure, yeah, you link them up and it's a perfect equation, right? So, okay, we'd like to move on to Chirag, please, if you could answer these as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, everyone. So I studied CS at undergrad and at the master's level. I grew up in India. The way it works over there is you have less freedom to make individual choices than you do in the US. You get swept up in these massive currents of this is what you should do with your life. And at that point, one of the common things to do with your life was get into the software engineering business. So that's kind of how, I just went along for the ride. And fortunately, it aligned with my interests. I always liked building things with things like blocks ever since I was a kid. So I was one of the fortunate ones where interests aligned with the current. On Unfortunately, the quality of education back there wasn't that great. So when I moved to the US, I felt pretty disadvantaged. I had a lot of catching up to do during my master's degree and during my first year on the job. And in India, it was the University of Mumbai, and in the US, it was Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. And I first started, exploring computers and computer science in late high school. And one of the first programs I wrote was, I don't know if you've seen the old calculator program from Windows, but we made something like that in Visual Basic. And it was really easy to make it look really identical. And it was just a really powerful feeling to see that you could build something that's, shipping to hundreds of millions of computers worldwide.
Yeah, it's super fantastic that like you grew up kind of like in that environment where you like to build things and you kind of find your way right away. Awesome. So we can move on to the next slide, please.
All right, and so with this next slide, similar to the slide prior to that, it's going to be the panelists answering the questions by set, and we're going to have 30 minutes for this whole slide right here. So we're going to go ahead and start with Mr. Joe, and I'm going to go ahead and read the questions to you. So the questions are, how did you find out about your niche within software engineering? What kind of work does your company do, and how does your role contribute to the overall company mission? Describe a project you are working on. And what is the work culture like for software engineering? And do you find that the work you are doing is similar to what you thought you were preparing for in college? Mr. Joe, all yours.
All right, thank you. Well, I wish I could answer the question about finding my niche inside of software engineering. I have had an amazing, fun career, and just let me give you a little bit of background. Before I started my company in 2008, I was working for a company that built software to do continuous integration, and that means that when you check in your code, it automatically becomes a build artifact that maybe even you could ship. From there, I went to my startup company, which distributed independent films, and so I was figuring out how to stream and monetize videos, kind of like around the time of YouTube. And then I went to Visa, where I was doing fraud detection and real-time messaging in a highly distributed network, billions and trillions of transactions happening every day. And then I went to a company that had an intelligence engine for making decisions about whether somebody was insurable or not. And now I'm at the lab writing software to configure experiments where we're blowing things up with a laser. So I have had just an amazing journey, and I really enjoy just the uncertainty. So there are a lot of people who find excitement about getting very, very good about solving a particular problem or inventing a technology that puts them on a trajectory that can take them anywhere that they want to go. Me, I'm quite a bit less focused, and I found that I enjoy solving brand new problems, maybe even problems that are unrelated to things that I've ever done before, because it almost feeds my interest in tinkering. So I would say that if you're not the kind of person who likes to focus on one thing for a very, very long time, software engineering is an amazing opportunity for you, because when you tire of one topic, you can still make a big difference by solving other kinds of problems in maybe a completely different vertical. So the company that I work for is Lawrence Livermore National Lab, and we have a few different missions. Among them are national security missions and taking care of the weapons stockpile that our country has. But another thing that we do at Lawrence Livermore Lab for the Department of Energy is kind of pure science research. So the National Ignition Facility is a 192 beam laser, and among the things that science allows us to do is to heat these fissionable materials to very high temperatures and pressures. And so there are national security implications to that, but there are also pure science things, like what happens when plasma reaches the temperature of the sun? Or there are energy research things where we can possibly develop a new clean energy technology. So my work in supporting that is helping scientists configure these very detailed experiments that have, you can imagine, thousands of little knobs and dials and widgets that go into making sure that they can not only configure the experiment, but to measure the output from that experiment and to see whether the high temperatures and pressures did the thing that they thought they would do when they were running either computational simulations or when they were using math to predict might happen. And the project that I'm working on is exactly that. The work culture for a software engineer coming at this as somebody who has worked from companies as structured as Visa and a national lab, and also a lot of startups, is that it is a very relaxed kind of a culture. I've had the benefit of working for a lot of very good companies in my career. And one of the things that I can tell you is that if you're a top performer, if you enjoy what you do and you come into work every day wanting to accomplish something, you're going to be successful. You're going to stand out. And when you're doing a good job, people are more interested in the results than seeing you punch a time card or meet a particular dress code. So I've been very fortunate that I have had those kinds of opportunities, but because of that, I believe that that culture goes throughout the entire industry. Maybe I'm a bit prejudiced for that. And then I had no idea that the work that I would be doing today was even imaginable when I started in college. I had no idea what the real software engineering world would look like. And just to give you a bit of perspective, when I left Indiana to move to California, I was making $10 an hour as a software developer for a little consulting company. And so there was a very limited view on what computer science was and what kinds of things could be built. So when I came out to California and I saw the real things that people were building, it almost knocked me to the floor. So the world is just changing so rapidly. I can't even imagine what the world is going to look like in 5 years now.
Wow. Thank you, Mr. Joseph. Yeah, like listening to what you've said, like, man, like software engineering is basically a course where you get to do things differently, and you really got me with the laser thing, honestly. Like, that's really, really cool. All right, and the next one we have now is Miss Morgan Steffi, and could you please answer the questions? Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so how did I find out about my niche within software engineering? I would say it happened for me in college. I founded a startup for competitive selfies, which is kind of silly, but it was the first time I was building an app. And I don't know, it was the right time. A lot of people use the app. So that was really fun. And I think it was perfect for me because I had a lot of motivation to build the app because we get feature requests and I want to have those features for the users. And what I discovered during that time was, with sort of opposite to what Joseph was saying, I really liked within iOS development, there's a lot more consistency. Where when I was building websites, there was, a million different frameworks, a million different ways to do it, which I think some people really enjoy, but I really liked that with iOS. I felt like I could more quickly be like, okay, this is the right way to do it. And then, because the part I really like is building features and building products for people to use. So I think there's different kinds of engineers who have different interests, and they're all really important. So I think, yeah, my niche felt like iOS apps, also because in hindsight, also as a kid, I loved making like worksheets for my siblings to do or building library systems. And so this felt another way I could create a complete experience for users and deliver it in the form of an app. So that's my niche. What kind of work does your company do? So I work for Quizlet, which is an ed tech company. Maybe some of you have used it. And we work to help students practice and master whatever they're trying to learn. So a lot of flashcards and learning tools. And I work on building the iOS app, obviously, so adding new features and fixing bugs. And a project that I'm working on is I recently helped build the Activity Center on iOS. So at Quizlet, we have different pods who work on different parts of the app. My part is re-engagement, so getting users to return. And I was the iOS engineer for the project. There was also an Android engineer and web engineer. So I contributed the iOS part, and basically the Activity Center is where users can see notifications they get. So wild that we didn't have it, but now we do. So that was really fun, and I really enjoyed it because it's user facing and is useful for the users. And I would say work culture at Quizlet, one of our values is teaching yourself something new, which has really stood out to me. I would say it's a super supportive culture where there's lots of pair programming. I would have initially, I think, been scared of pair programming because I'd be like, I don't want someone else to see that I don't know something. But I think Quizlet for me, or I mean, just work in general, has sort of turned that on its head and made me realize that being a software engineer is about learning. You don't learn everything in college. You learn most of the stuff while you're at work. And so working together is a great way to, both people can learn from each other during pair programming. And sort of going along with that, it's a lot about being excited to look for big opportunities versus I think in high school or college, I would have said, I want to avoid big scary projects I might fail. But it's more about leaning into like, oh, this is exciting. I haven't worked on this part of the code yet. I'll get to learn something new. And Quizlet also has a lot of work-life balance, which I really appreciate. Just like a belief that you'll be a better engineer if you also are taking time to not be an engineer or to work on side projects that interest you.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah. Like basically from starting to change what the start button says to actually making an app is something that you've done. And that's really amazing. And one thing I also like to say is you guys working for Quizlet, you and Chirag, I'm just very thankful because Quizlet has helped me in countless homeworks. And yeah, it's like countless homeworks. I've gotten A's because of you guys. I just wanted to thank you for that, man. Yeah, thank you. And we'll go ahead and go with Mr. Chirag. Thank you, sir.
Well, and thank you for being a Quizlet user. We really
Of
appreciate
course.
you. We're here for you.
Of course. Thank you. Yeah.
Cool. Let me go through the questions. So my niche, I've kind of deliberately been a generalist for as long as I've worked in this industry. I'm not passionate, about technology itself, but more about, what are the problems that technology enables us to solve. I've worked mostly on web development, so that's, what I know, but I'm happy to jump into any technology as needed. More recently, I've been interested in things like how do businesses arise and how do they thrive, or sometimes, how do they end? And in Silicon Valley, the most common way that happens is you have an idea, you get someone else to pay for it, and now you have this ticking clock where you have to make something of it or you go bust. So I think just trying to play that game is super fascinating to me. I work at Quizlet. Morgan did a really good job of describing what Quizlet is, and I'm sure many of you are already familiar. The part I'll add is closer to what I work on. So Quizlet, as you probably know, is free for anyone to use without payment. In fact, over 90% of our users don't pay us. And philosophically, we want to be free just because we feel really aligned with the mission of learning and education. And so we want to bring that value to as many users as we can. But the way in which we stay in business is by selling subscriptions to premium features. So that's the main way. There are other revenue streams as well. So that's the part of Quizlet that I work on. We try to work on ways to promote our paid subscriptions to the right user at the right time. And we also build the infrastructure that will go and talk to Apple or Google or Stripe to collect payments and to manage subscriptions. On that team, a recent project I've been involved in is fraud. So we saw in the past couple of months, we saw a sudden spike in the number of fraudulent transactions on Quizlet. And what people are doing is, they have these lists of stolen credit card numbers, and they find these sites that they try to verify those numbers against to find out which ones have been canceled and which ones they can still use to spend money on. And so they've been using Quizlet, not because they're really excited about learning and education and they want to buy the subscription, but because they just want to see which cards are still active. And so we've been chasing them down, and we've successfully brought that fraud down to almost to zero. So that's been a fun recent project. Culture as a software engineer, overall, I would say I feel really fortunate to be in this industry. I would say the baseline of culture itself is pretty high. All you need, to be effective is in terms of equipment. You just need a laptop and an internet connection. That itself, I feel really lucky about that. Interestingly, it's sometimes not fair, but the engineering culture at a company is often healthier and better than in other departments at that same company. And like Joe pointed out, tech is largely a meritocracy. So if you perform, you get rewarded. And it's really important for, as individuals, we need to feel like we're being treated fairly. So as a baseline, all of these things exist. The big variables I see that influence culture are geography and the company you work at. Geography, because every city you live in is going to give you a different signal. In the Bay Area, the signal is you need to start something of your own. You need to be a founder. That's like the aspiration that everyone aspires to. In New York, it's like, you need to make more money. And then at the company level, it really depends on your skill set, because the more talented and the more skillful workers can cluster towards certain companies, and then those companies try really hard to retain them, which makes the culture much better. So, as an example, the first company I worked at, we had to fill in these timesheets at the end of the week, and it took about 10 minutes, and it was a total drag. It provided almost no value to anyone. Overall, we were probably spending about, almost $1 million a year in terms of engineering time, just filling in those timesheets for almost nothing. But in more recent companies I worked at, that's, totally not a thing that exists. I also want to point out a couple of trends that I'm seeing in this industry of changing culture. And one is that, 30 years ago, the way we thought about whether a software project would be a failure or success was, do we have the right technology for this project? And now that thinking has completely changed. It's not about the technology, it's more about the soft stuff. It's more about, things like, are your people engaged? Are your processes right? Are you planning it the right way? And so in reaction to that discovery and that slow realization, there's been more and more emphasis on interpersonal dynamics. So for example, are you comfortable giving someone hard feedback? And if not, here's some training that you can probably go through to help you with that. And on the planning side, at one point, software projects used to run, a whole year just to ship a new version of something. And now that's unheard of. We are updating the Quizlet website at least 10 times a day, as an example, just to give you a sense of how much that's changed. Another trend that's been really good to see over the past few years is in diversity. And as an industry, we realize and have started to acknowledge that most people at the company look kind of similar, especially in terms of gender and race. And so it's been good to see that the industry has been reacting to that. The last one, does my education correlate to the job? Not too much. However, I do feel like the job of education is to build a foundation and establish that foundation. And I think it did that to a sufficient degree. One thing I wish I knew more about back then was how do you work effectively in a team? Because I think college and education in general is a very individualistic experience. And being your best self as an individual is different from being the best team member you can be.
Thank you, Mr. Chirag. And like you said, yeah, the thing about like you, Morgan, and Joseph said, like, you have to be the best in order to be someone in the field. And I feel like as someone who's competitive, that actually excites me. Like you said, like there's always a ticking clock where you have to finish something at a specific time, and that's one of the reasons why I took computer science. And we're going to go to Mr. Thomas now. Thank you, sir.
Hello again. Wow, those are really great talks. I appreciate what everyone had to say. And in the meantime, I checked out Quizlet, and that's a really beautiful application. I hadn't looked at it before. But in terms of my niche within software engineering, I didn't, like I said earlier, didn't really plan on coming into software engineering and was a bit self-taught. So my first starting point was just making websites because it was easy and it was cheap. You didn't need to buy any software, any tools. You could build your first website with a text editor, and even hosting is free now. So that was just low-hanging fruit. But it's been 7 years now, and I feel like I'm just finding my niche actually, which has been really focusing on what's called front-end web development, which is sort of the parts that you see and interact with, buttons, navigations, drop-downs, forms, and less of what's going on behind the scenes to drive those applications. And more so within that, there's a kind of a subfield called UX, which is user experience. And that's really what I've been focusing on in the last few years, is how can we best solve a problem for the user, and how can we make that experience as seamless and efficient and enjoyable as possible? And that's what I found a lot of excitement in, especially since I have a background in mental health and behavioral health. It's one of the moments where engineering and psychology actually intersect in some really interesting ways, and in ways that really excite me. In terms of the company does, I actually just started 2 weeks ago a new job at my current company. So the company before that was at for 5 years. So I can speak a little bit to both. But the new company I'm working at, Medical Solutions, is really interesting and really aligns with my own values about like solving sort of urgent needs in the world. We work to help place nurses and lab techs in hospitals where there's nursing and medical staff shortages, which is actually a really, really big issue in the country right now, especially with COVID, as the needs for nursing staff and for lab techs is constantly fluctuating. COVID will introduce itself really prominently in a community, and the number of nurses they need can kind of double overnight. And so our company helps create web applications for hospitals to request nurses, and then for nurses to also sign up for travel assignments with those hospitals. And so specifically within there, I'm working on a project that we're kind of calling it like the Uber for nurses, where like if you're a hospital and for whatever reason, whether it's a nurse had a death in the family and they need to take time off, or you just have double the need for nurses, you can use an application to request nurses. And different than Uber, there's not a ton of like compliance that needs to be filled out, but with nurses, there's a ton, right? Does their license work in this state? Are they accredited to do the type of nursing work that you need in your hospital? And so we're trying to make all of that really seamless so that the hospital can just worry about getting the staff they need to treat patients and not have to handle a lot of like complex paperwork. And surprisingly, this process right now is just like people send emails, like somebody will email a nurse and say like, can you work at this hospital on Friday? And the hospital will email our company and say like, get a nurse on Friday. And so we're trying to automate that process through a series of web applications. And in terms of like my role in that, it's actually really interesting. I think I saw some chat about like, how much are you spending your day coding? What does your day look like? And it's really been interesting for me. When I first started this career, I went from working with people all day in mental health, and then I did like a 180 where I was headphones on, playing Spotify, writing code in a corner all day. Nobody wanted to talk to me. And that was actually really hard for me. Some people love that about being a developer. And that can be part of the craft, is really focused on writing code, building features. But it felt like a bit of a disconnect. And it took me a few years to kind of move up into more of a leadership position, where now most of my day, actually, like today, I haven't written any code. I am more talking with understanding what is it the users need? What are the problems they're encountering, and how can we build that? And I'm actually managing a team of front-end engineers who are going to be the ones to actually build those features. And most of the time, I'm either reviewing code, I'm meeting with, like I said, users, but also with designers. I work really closely with artists who are going to tell me about the look, the feel, the color, the texture of the experience, and making sure that that's all technically feasible. So there's actually a whole spectrum within computer science and software engineering of being directly in touch with implementation all the way to much more management. And neither is sort of better or more hierarchically important. It just depends on your interests. There's a lot of folks who go and spend a whole lifetime becoming the master of craft, like the very best, you know, Java engineer, and that can take a lifetime to master. And then some folks go more into like the soft skill side of it as well. And a lot of folks do both at the same time. So it's very flexible in that way. And I found it really exciting for me to be able to gravitate towards the parts of the craft that I'm most excited about. In terms of the work culture, I want to check on time here, talk just a little bit about this. You know, coming from a nonprofit environment where resources were really stretched thin, you know, like I remember my first job as a social worker, I brought my own like pens to the office because they couldn't afford pens for everybody. And when we'd run out of printer paper, like workers would just bring in extra printer paper, and that was kind of par for the course. And so I was like blown away to get my first like front end engineering job for like an agency setting that I worked at, where money seemed like abundant. There was like cold brew coffee being poured, and there was snacks everywhere. And I was like, what? This is amazing. People are playing ping pong. So all of that felt very, very exciting at first. And it still is. But obviously, like now the things that are much more exciting to me are like finding places that are solving important missions. And there's plenty of tech work that aren't. You know, there's a lot of questions right now about, are we solving problems with technology, or are we creating distractions? Are we creating noise? Are we creating social media platforms that are like addictive as opposed to helping us connect with other people? And so I think that is one part of the culture of software, specifically out of Silicon Valley, that we're starting to grapple with, is like, are we best serving users, or are we serving the companies? You know, is Facebook wanting to keep you involved in Facebook longer for them, or for you to connect with your friends? And, you know, the intent is good, right? To connect you with people and places and things that you care about, but really trying to, as an industry, assess how well we're doing that. Others had mentioned, you know, really starting to look at diversity. And in the company that I worked at last, you know, when I first got there, there were two, out of a team of 20 engineers, there were 2 women engineers. And so we're really trying to increase the number of female engineers in software development, because that's how we create really good code. So they were able to move that much closer to about, I think it was 40-60 when I left, which was a pretty big stride, but a long ways to go still, especially making sure that there's positions of leadership for female engineers. It's just been really lacking in the industry, and something that I'm actively like offering. And so actually I'll make that an offer now. If folks want to connect with me on LinkedIn, specifically women and people of color, I've opened myself up for providing mentorship and support in any way possible for folks in those affinity groups. So anyways, just a side note there. And then, no, I didn't think I was going to be doing any of this when I was in college. I took one like programming class, and I hated it. I thought it was so boring. So it's really funny to find myself doing all of this, but I don't think, I'm really glad for everyone who's here, because I had no idea. I thought all software development was writing like server-side code, which is super exciting for some folks. It wasn't exciting for me. I didn't know that it could involve art, that it could involve psychology, that it could involve solving these like really critical problems of our time. Because where I went to school in LA, most of the folks who did computer science went straight to work for sort of military industrial places with like Northrop Grumman and Raytheon. And so I just didn't know this part of the industry existed that ended up sort of captivating my personal interest. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride, and we'll see where it goes next, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I feel like how you said your story gives so much light and strength to the quote, "Don't let schooling interfere with your education." Because like you said, like you didn't find programming interesting at all, but then you found ways to learn it on your own, and here you are. And like you saying that you haven't coded in like a day or two just makes me remember my uncle saying that, you know, you've made it in the field when you actually don't code anymore. You just tell people what to do. And I don't know, that just reminded me of my uncle with what you said. But yeah, thank you for answering that, Mr. Thomas. Yeah. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you, Amber. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So now we're going to open up our panel for our Q&A with our panelists. So this is your opportunity to ask them any questions. We already have some questions in the chat, but if anyone would like to unmute themselves to ask a question now before I begin with that, please do. All right, so it seems that I'm gonna read from. So our first, oh, did anybody unmute? My bad. No, okay, we'll continue. Okay, so this one's from Caroline. Curiously, what's your work-life balance like as a software engineer, and how much of your day is spent working with your team? If anyone would like to answer that.
I'll jump in real quick, which is just, for me, it's been tough. I'll be really honest. I know some people who create really good boundaries, but what I've learned when I was working much more in code is a lot of places, especially like I was working, like I said, for a digital agency where we had clients, the Nike, the Facebook, the Instagram. And the faster I worked, the more things I did, the more things that got assigned to me is what I experienced. And so it took me a long time to learn not to do less, but to set realistic boundaries and realistic estimates, because my managers would take as much as I would give them. And so I found myself working really, really long days. But I also have found later in my career that as I set boundaries with managers, that they're really respectful of that. But that said, I feel like I've been working really, really hard for the last 7-8 years.
Well, yeah, for sure, it's a lot of work. So would anyone like to add to that question before I move on to the next?
That resonates with me. I feel like that's, the downside of a meritocracy is that you get more responsibility and more assignments if you're doing well. And so it's really up to you to figure out your boundaries. And I absolutely was not good at that until I had a kid, and I was kind of forced to be more present at home. I see Thomas nodding vigorously. But I would recommend you to figure out your balance well before that.
I think one thing that was really useful for me at Quizlet was to see some of my really well-respected peers who got lots of work done, were known as hard workers, still say something like, oh, can we move the meeting? I'm doing my afternoon walk at 1 p.m. Or like, oh, every day at 4 p.m. I take a 20-minute nap, especially now with COVID that we're all at home. I think that really enabled me to take space and set boundaries, seeing others do the same and realizing if your break isn't the entire day or 5 hours long, you can still be a really high contributor and take breaks. And then as far as ratio of work to talking with people, I think since going remote, I'm in more meetings now because it takes a little bit more overhead to stay in sync. And maybe at most 40% of my time is talking to people. The rest is coding, which is more than I thought it would be, but I think it's required for making sure you're solving the right problems.
Okay, so now I'm gonna move on. Thank you for sharing. I'm gonna move on to the next question. So this is from Zara. I know in tech, everything is constantly changing, and therefore you're always constantly learning. How do you keep up with these changes, and does it ever get overwhelming? And if so, how do you overcome that feeling?
So I guess I can take this one. This is a great question because it requires us to stay humble. It doesn't matter how good or how senior someone is. I've worked with people who have been in the industry for a very, very long time and think they know everything. And those are the kinds of people that are working on 20-year-old technology. And if you try to make life better, improve the performance of an application, bring it up to date, there's a lot of resistance. And so I think what you should be seeking is not really trying to stay up to date with the latest technologies. You should always be looking for better, faster, cheaper. And so is there a piece of software that you can use that does this work for you? Don't get trapped into the pattern of trying to re-implement something that somebody else has built. Pull in libraries from things like the Apache Foundation. if you can. Don't try to write a string parser if that's not what you're trying to do. I found that a lot of the technology that I'm working with, it ages while I'm on a project. So I might start on a project with a technology that I've been looking at for a few months and I think it's great. And then by the time the project is done, that technology is a little bit out of date. So just try to pick things that are stable rather than trying to chase the latest and greatest thing. But absolutely try to stay humble and realize that you're never going to find the perfect solution. You're never going to be the person who knows everything about the technology. You should just be willing to find a technology that does what you need it to do. Get good at it so that you're effective in your job, and make sure that the software does what you expect it to, and then move on. All the while trying to learn from whatever you were working on so that you can bring that with you to your next project.
I really like what Joe said. The one thing I'll add is that there's some things that are quite timeless in the industry. So even though things feel like they're changing very often, there's some things that are also very much the same. My guess is that there's never been a significant software project that failed because they use Python instead of Ruby. But I do think there have been hundreds of thousands of projects that failed because they didn't really understand the core requirements to begin with, or the requirements kept changing as it was being built. Or there were politics, at the team or at the company. And these are the things that to me are timeless. And if you pay attention to those and get better at those, I think you will be a better software engineer.
Awesome. So I'm going to move on to our next question from Shangwell. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong, if I butchered it. So I am curious, do you make if you make mistakes during a project, how do you overcome that feeling when you are not able to solve it? And do you feel anxiety when you are not able to overcome this question, overcome something that you are not familiar with?
I love this question so much. It's such a good question. So I'm gonna jump in. Which is like, I felt for so much, especially as someone who didn't have a degree in computer science, I constantly questioned, like, am I faking this? Am I just making this up? Does everybody in this room know something I don't know? And I've learned that that's not to being a software engineer or really anything. That's just a very common experience of being new in an industry. And what I have learned to help combat that over time is, one, just like affirming myself, like, you're good enough. But two, reaching out, like I think Joe mentioned it, like humility goes a long way. And actually a lot of my teammates people love to talk about things that they know a lot about. So like when I encounter a problem that I've never solved before, there's a really good probability someone else on my team has solved it before, and that they're really excited to share that knowledge with me. And that's one of the things I love about software development, is there's lots of folks can have different areas of expertise and knowledge. Like I've been learning a lot about accessibility, but there's somebody on my team who they've dedicated their life to making websites more accessible, and I can go to them for advice and best practices, and they're excited to share it with me. I find that there's a lot of joy for collaboration. There's even this whole community around open source software where engineers are excited to share their work with other engineers so we can collaboratively improve processes. So I think the biggest thing mitigating that anxiety is that it's a very large community of developers who are willing and wanting to support each other.
I also got super excited when I read this question. And I agree with everything Thomas said. I would add to that one thing. If you are not making a mistake from time to time, you're not learning. I expect to make a mistake. And here's why. If you don't make a mistake, then it's very likely you're doing something that everybody else can do, right? You're not discovering anything. You're not pushing the boundaries. You're not inventing something. And that inventiveness, that innovation comes with some risks that you're going to make some assumptions that just don't hold true in the real world. So move fast, break things, and then be honest enough to admit that mistake as quickly as you can, to figure out what went wrong as quickly as you can, and raise your hand and say, hey, I made a mistake today. Don't cover it up. Don't try to hide it. Say, I made that mistake. Reach out to the people that are supporting you, whether it's your mentor, your manager, your peers, the other people in your team, and just say, okay, I'm in this situation now. I don't know what to do to get past it. But that's not a technical problem, right? Getting yourself out of a mess is not always and is often not a technical issue. It's a process. It's a troubleshooting process. How do I frame this problem in a way that I can get my brain around it? And the sooner you bring people in, and the sooner you admit that you've kind of gone this way, the sooner you stop spending time, energy, money, and effort to solve a problem that, you know, maybe you say, hey, I shouldn't have been solving this problem. I should have been doing something else. But yeah, move fast, break things, be honest about it, and actually look for opportunities to fail.
I agree with that. I think that was really well said, Joe. Just to, give the person who asked this question a sense of how often, if you're coding, if your main job is coding, I would guess that you're making, small to medium-sized mistakes every single day, and it's honestly not a big deal at all. And one of the great things about code is that it's code. You can go back and change it. So that's one very fortunate circumstance of our industry. And then the last part of your question was, how long does it take to be a master at coding? I've been doing this for 11 years. I wouldn't call myself a master by any stretch. And over time, my perception of what's valuable has changed. And it was definitely more on, how can I be a better coder at one point? And now that's not something I actively strive to do.
Awesome, very insightful. I love the input from everybody. It's very positive. Like, don't take your mistakes and dwell on them. It's just get up and move on. It's very, very wise. So then we have our next question would be from Michael. So how many coding languages are you all comfortable with? And what's used in the industry, and what would you recommend to learn?
I think most of us would probably answer that we either know dozens of them or we know none of them, because they're always evolving. And I wouldn't suggest anything beyond, when you're starting out, looking for a problem that you're trying to solve, or looking for a company that really seems to be successful, because the language isn't necessarily the thing that is going to make you successful. I write Java code, I write Node, I write TypeScript code with React and Angular, but I don't think in those languages. Those are just a platform for me to try to get to the problem. It is important, however, that you do understand the way that software is built behind that language, so that you can pick up another one. And those skills are going to translate. They're going to move over to whatever tool set you need to use. In a lot of ways, you can think of a coding language as, if you're working on an automobile, are you using metric tools, or are you using imperial, like 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch sockets? They're still going to accomplish the same thing for you. They just aren't always going to fit exactly with each other.
I'll chime in and agree that learning how to learn new languages is probably more useful than just knowing a lot of them. Right now, I would say I know Swift and Objective-C, and that's probably about it. But in the past, with my startup, it was just such a good opportunity where if you were just try to build something and then build all of the parts. So just like plow through, like I had my UI, but then I was like, oh, I need a backend, I need a database. And being able to, I'm sure I didn't do any of those things well, but just dive in and be like, oh, this is the language that makes sense for this. I'm gonna do a little something here, a little something there, and see how they all fit together. I think if you have like free time and want to do that, that was hugely helpful for me.
So the next question would be, how do you find work that aligns with your values?
I think it's challenging. It's challenging because, you know, most of us want to be able to pay our bills, pay to live, have food. And obviously there's lots of companies that are doing amazing things in this world, but finding one that's hiring, that aligns with your mission and values, that can pay enough to pay your bills is like, I found that to be challenging personally. One of the things that I've learned that's been really helpful is being really candid in interview processes. You know, I think later on in my career, I just kind of wanted to like get the job for whatever was the best company that paid the most money, that was going to have prestige. And I've learned later on to be really transparent about what it is that I value about a work culture, the kind of impact the world. And interviewers like respond really well to that. And like this last position, I was like, yeah, I don't really want to code all day. They're like, great, love for you to not code all day. And that sort of candor about what it is that I want to do, which is to be like helping other people solve problems and collaborating, met a need that they had that I wouldn't have known if I had been like, well, I'm the best JavaScript engineer and I can do it. Like that would have given the impression of something that I wasn't, or doing something all day that I wasn't as excited to be doing. So I just think it's challenging early on because everybody's trying to make a name for themselves and, like I said, pay their bills. But as much as you can be sincere and honest and have a clear insight into what it is that you bring to the table, like you can find companies that match those skill sets and those values with what's going on at that company.
All right, I think we have time for one more question because we're already past our 2 o'clock mark and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So our last question would be, what does communication look like in the industry? Are there any company accommodations for software engineering?
Right off the bat, I would say it's way more important than I thought. When I was in college, I just thought all of my jobs would just be writing code by myself, and being able to communicate well with people has been really important. And at Quizlet, we mostly use Slack and Google Hangouts. So some meetings, and I guess some emails, but I think Slack is our big go-to.
I agree with Morgan that I too undervalued it in the beginning. I think it's extremely important now. And we do use Slack very heavily. We also rely a lot on internal documentation. So, you know, that's creating a doc for whether it's for someone else to comment on or just for posterity to share knowledge. And also, you know, I'd love to hear more about the kind of the sentiment behind this question, but if there's, you know, maybe I may be wrong, but if there's, you know, a sense of worry that are my communication skills good enough? You know, it's always changing. So I would, you know, encourage you to immerse yourself in an environment where you feel like it'll help you improve. And you know, there are thousands of people who have this anxiety. I also had it at one point. And, you know, everyone gets better mostly through just immersing yourself. And it's super uncomfortable in the beginning, but you get better.
Awesome. Thank you. Would anyone else like to add before I move on to the next question? All right, let's see. Okay, so actually we end at 2:15. My apologies. I thought we ended at 2. So we'll have time for more questions. Another question we have is, what do you think makes someone successful in your position?
One thing that's served me well so far is just, having pride in my work and having a sense of ownership in what I do. And I found that, that's a common thread across people I've seen who are successful. Other things I tend to do, I tend to look at what people above me are doing and what they might need help with, and just to see if I can chip in some way. And in the beginning, I thought it was all about mastering the technology. And this year we had someone who joined us straight out of college. And the first thing he did when he joined Quizlet was he started setting up these meetings, these one-on-one, quick 15 or 30-minute meetings with a whole bunch of people on the team, outside the team. And that was one of the smartest new hire moves I've seen, is to focus on building relationships and not just thinking that you have to just dive deep into the code and live in that world.
I think the most successful engineers I've seen are really engaged with what they're working on, have a lot of curiosity, and aren't just trying to kind of boringly plow through the work, but figure out the heart of the problem they're trying to solve. And then also they are really humble, which I think if you are humble, it's a lot easier to communicate. I think the people I've seen who have strongest communication skills are people who aren't afraid to mess up, aren't afraid to reach out to people. And also I echo everything Chirag said.
All right. Thomas, did you want to add anything to this question?
Sure. Yeah, I think I was about to talk. I was thinking of something, but I must have seen that I had thought bubbles coming out of my head. Well, I was just thinking, because I just left a company that I had been at for 5 years, and they were, the last day, folks were really kind, and we had a little Zoom going away party, and I was just thinking about the things that folks said to me, and I think one person was like, yeah, you're this great developer, but the things that had made an impact on the people that I was working with were things like people told me, you really took the time to listen to me, to hear my problems, the things that were stressing me out. You really cared about my craft for people who were not in my discipline. So when I worked with designers or project managers, that they were you cared about what I was doing and saw that as important to what you were doing. So, I mean, maybe it's cliche, but those interpersonal things, this real attentiveness to the people that we serve, I think it is really valued, especially because sometimes there's this stereotype that engineers are in some way antisocial or withdrawn. And that's obviously not true. There's a whole spectrum of people who do engineering. So yeah, I don't know. That's just a thought, having just left a company, is that those interactions ended up being the most valuable thing that people thought I offered. And that's not even on my job description, to listen to people and to support and mentor new folks at the company. So.
Awesome. I love that. That's very nice when you get to hear, because everything we do goes unnoticed, right? But when you really get to explain to someone or show your appreciation, it hits a little bit different, and it makes you rethink that, you not only affect the people that you're serving, like you said, but the people around you as well. So that was actually the last question in the chat. If anyone would like to unmute themselves and have any last minute questions before we end our panel, now would be the time to do so.
If no one's gonna go, I'll go. Yeah, as a speaker, listening to you guys, understanding that the things you've taught us today is not more on what I'm doing today, like homework, like calculus. It's more of the things that, the relationships you build and how to become a better person in a team. And I feel like those are things that aren't actually taught in a Java class. They taught you like, oh, this is what string is. Oh, this is, but they don't teach you that in the near future you do those things. And I feel like a question I have is more on a technical thing, because I've had a professor who told me, who was also in the field, that even though statistics isn't something that we're supposed to take as a computer science major, is it something that you'd recommend computer science majors take, or software engineers?
Personally, I've found, uh, at least some kind of basic statistics crop
Mm-hmm.
up in real life again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say that for most things. That's almost never come up for calculus. But just to give you an example, so the way I'm sure you're familiar, the way things change in an application is quite often through A/B testing, where you test whether
Yes.
one way of doing something is better than another way of doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a lot of statistics involved in arriving at that result.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not very complicated, but there you are confronted by statistics. And in a world where data is there's more and more data than there's ever been, and it's getting generated at an enormous pace, and there's a lot of value in that data. You can make a lot of decisions with it. And so I would say equipping yourself with enough of a foundation so that when later you may have to go build upon that foundation, it's less daunting and less scary. Personally, I would recommend that.
Oh, thank you, sir. Yeah, that was one thing I wanted to know, right? Because everything I've learned today is things that usually don't hear, like everything you guys have said today. These are things that aren't really taught right now. Like when I'm doing my homework, they don't teach you, oh, you have to become someone who actually knows how to work in a team, because they don't tell you that, like you said, in personal experience. And yeah, thank you for doing this. And I'm sure I speak for everyone listening here that we're like sponges right now. We're soaking all this information and this experience from you guys. And yeah, I hope we basically become better computer science majors or people in the field. Yeah.
So I myself had a question. So when you're like very down or like you're kind of blue, what's something that motivates you to like get back on track?
I think, sorry, stepping away from the problem. If I'm really stuck on something, going for a walk is helpful, or zooming out a little. The times that I've spent 3 days stuck on a bug, it's because I zoomed in too close and was like the problem somewhere here when really the problem was like way over here. Or having like a list of like side projects that interest you. I know my mentor, my technical mentor, often recommends I keep a list of things. And when I'm working on the app, if I notice something that seems off or wrong, that when I'm frustrated with one thing, I can grab something from that list that's like fun and interesting to kind of think about something else, be happy, and then get back to the tough problem.
I could maybe add a little bit to that. I agree with with Morgan's strategies. I think there's also a range of feeling blue from, something that can be cured by a quick, YouTube break or a quick distraction to, sometimes you're really deep in a hole and, it's not something that you can come out of in minutes or even days. And at that point, I've been in that situation, and sometimes I haven't talked to people and I was alone. And, later on, I was more willing to talk to people, and it always helped. And the response has always been surprisingly warm. It's always like, oh yeah, I've been there, or oh yeah, I know how to deal with this. It's not like, oh wait, don't talk to me about that kind of stuff at work. So I would recommend, just being a human even at work, and that's becoming more and more of an accepted and welcome thing in the workplace.
Thank you, I appreciate it. That makes me think of when like I would play music back in high school and I wouldn't be able to do something, I'd get like so mad at my instrument. Like it's not even funny. But like yeah, stepping away and like talking with others, I think that really like recharges me and helps me get back on track. So thank you for sharing, you guys. If anyone, last minute question, we got 2 minutes left. Please ask questions. If not, then I think this is
I
it.
have a 15-second comment, which is just for everyone who's attending this. I just think that's really incredible because I wasn't even thinking about like the workforce until it was right upon me. You know, I was like getting handed my diploma. I'm like, oh wait, I need a job. So I just really applaud the intentionality of showing up to an event like this and investing in your future through like gaining information and stories. It's not a process I did, so I really respect everyone who showed up.
Yes, thank you. It was wonderful having all of you here and having the panelists be very authentic and tell us their stories. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, I have one question. My name's Jeffrey Madrid from Santa Ana College. What are one of your weaknesses that you recognize?
Lately, I've been working on having more confidence. I think I have a lot of technical skills, but sometimes I don't believe I do. I have a lot of imposter syndrome, which totally gets in the way of work. So I'm working on having more confidence.
I'm working on, back when we were working in the office, I had about 30 minutes between ending the workday and getting home. And it was a good time to just, process and reflect and transition from work mode to home mode. And right now it takes me about 3 seconds to go from work mode to home mode. And so I'm working on, just being more present on not, having that background train of wrapping up those thoughts and wondering if you made the right decisions and thinking about what you still have left to do and what you're going to be doing. Especially important as, as soon as I head out, I'm spending time with my kid. I want to make sure I'm present for her.
So I believe that concludes our panel.
Yes,
We've
it does.
come to the end. Thank you for being here. It was really incredible. So I would like to hand it over to my co-moderator.
All right. Well, thank you, Crystal. And like the slide says, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for the viewers, the panelists, everyone that's here. And like I said prior, for everyone, for all the students that are here, I feel like to the panelists, we're all sponges right now. We're just soaking up that information, just getting ready for the workforce, man. Like, you just want to know how to basically not make life easier, but just become more ready than we can be. And I feel like everything you've shared today is something that we can use in the near future for sure. And like the slide says, these are the contact information for all 4 of the panelists for today. In case you want to ask them any questions, here they are. And like, once again, thank you so much for everyone. And I hope everyone has a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everyone.